Colin Rogers with our next question. Hello, Colin.
Hello, Chris. Thank you very much. In the small village where I've lived for 25 years, only 6 of the 19 houses are now, like mine, permanently occupied. 9 are second homes, 3 are holiday lets. Meanwhile, in nearby Penzance, an ordinary 2-bedroom house recently had over 50 viewings in a week and sold for 25% more than the asking price. Where are my teenage Cornish grandchildren going to live?
Colin, thank you. And you can hear from the reaction here in the room how big an issue it is here in Cornwall. Of course, an issue in its own way in so many corners of the UK. Just looking at some statistics from the Office for National Statistics, in Cornwall, the average home costs about 11 times average earnings. In England as a whole, it is 9 times. Then there's the whole question, as we touched on there, about unoccupied properties too. I think Katrina Davis first on this one.
Yeah, well, tragically, they're going to find it really difficult. It was difficult when I wrote my book, which came out in 2019, and it's massively more difficult now. As you say, Chris, actually, in St Ives, where my mum lives in social housing, the average house is £440,000, which is 17 times the median income in Cornwall. So they're not likely to be able to buy. So let's say they try and rent, your teenage grandchildren try to rent. Well, that's going to be really tricky too, because last year we saw that there were 10,000 Airbnbs advertised in Cornwall and only 69 long-term lets. So let's say they do manage to get one of the 69. They'll be paying about £1,000 a month average rents, but they'll probably be doing minimum wage tourism jobs which stop in the winter. So that would be a real struggle. But let's say they managed it and they got through a winter. At the end of the winter, they'd probably be evicted, because what's happening now is a lot of the houses that were rented out long term are being flipped into holiday lets and Airbnbs because the landlords can make more money and because there are incentives to do that. So then they go to Cornwall Council, they ask to be put on the housing register. Well, in 2019, there were 12,000 people on the Cornwall Council housing register. In 2021, there were 16,000, and now there are 22,000. So they're not going to get very far. So they're going to end up in temporary accommodation.
Tell me about, I mentioned your book in the introduction, Homesick or Why I Live in a Shed. Tell me briefly about that and why you chose to, well, live in a shed. Because
I couldn't see my way to being able to write books and live on a low income and also provide myself with housing in the private rental market, even then. And it was much, much easier then. So, I really feel for the kids now. And, so I've heard from families who are living in temporary accommodation. And by the way, Cornwall Council taxpayers pay £17,000 a day to fund the people living in temporary accommodation who we can't house.
What's the solution to this?
Well, okay, so we have 22,000 people on the Cornwall Council housing register. According to census data from 2011, and this will be different now, it'll be more, there are 22,000 second homes in Cornwall. So clearly what we need to do is get the people who need the housing into the houses, okay? And there are many, many ways of doing that. But one thing I will say is I know some people on this panel are going to say we need to build more houses. Well, I'll just say that according to the government's own figures, if they meet their target of building 300,000 houses a year for the next 20 years, and they're nowhere near meeting that target, by the way, it's only going to bring house prices down by 6%. And in Camborne last year, they went up 30%. So that's not going to solve the problem. We need to get the people who need the houses into the houses. We need to get the people who need the houses out of the holiday parks and the holiday makers into the holiday parks.
And the Cabinet Minister, Michael Gove, suggesting that target you referred to may have bitten the dust as well. John Stevens.
I think the second homes are a big problem in somewhere like Cornwall. And it doesn't just price out locals, it also hollows out communities. If you go down the road from Penzance to somewhere like Mousehole, on a midweek evening in the middle of February, say, or some other winter month, and you look up from the harbour and you will see barely any lights on because no one's there then. And that means that places there like little shops aren't able to survive and have to shut down. Little community services aren't able to thrive because there aren't the people there all the year round to make them work. And I think that the government clearly are going to have to build more houses, and I think it will be a big problem for the government if they do miss that target. Michael Gove this week suggested that they wouldn't be able to meet the target of building 300,000 homes. And this government came in 2019 with an 80-strong majority. It's slightly down now because of various reasons, but they still do have a big majority. And if they aren't able to take the action now that needs to be done to be able to finally start building houses for this country, then they're never going to be able to do it. And you might get to the next election and say the Tories are still in, but they've lost their majority. They're now in a minority administration like Theresa May after 2017. And then things will be so much more difficult. And they'll look back to now and think we just wasted that time with that huge majority and did nothing with it.
Selene Saxby, Conservative MP, I mentioned that your seat is in North Devon, where a lot of the issues that we were touching on there in Colin's question resonate as well. And yet the challenge, whether it's Cornwall or Devon or other parts of the country, is that tourism is a huge revenue generator. So how do you get that balance right between the tourism industry and local housing?
It's a real challenge, and I, like Colin, I spent the pandemic on a close of 30 houses with just a handful occupied and no lights on. So I know what this is like, and in North Devon we have exactly the same issues. Ours is the second fastest house price rise in the country at the present time. So I led the debate on affordable homes in Devon and Cornwall in Westminster, where we have cross-party support asking for exactly the same thing. I was with the Minister at lunchtime when I asked again where the majority of MPs were from Devon and Cornwall. So it is a huge issue, and in terms of how we actually start to tackle it, at least steps are being taken to start to increase council tax for second homes. It's a small first step, but it does an indication that people are listening. But we do need our tourists down here. But I think there are also, we are waiting on a consultation that was announced last June in the tourism bounce back after COVID, which is due to actually assess the some sort of registration scheme for short-term holiday lets and Airbnbs, which would then enable councils to actually register them, perhaps have a change of use, so that we knew how many there were. We don't even know how many there are, and Katrina's right, same in my area, there's no long-term rental.
And to be clear, are you of the view that there are too many unoccupied homes where you are?
Certainly in the summer there's not, but in the winter there is, and I think we have just seen an imbalance. So we've always welcomed holidaymakers and second homes to Devon, and we need them in our economy, but we also need homes so that people who run things like hotels and restaurants can afford to live there and have homes to live in. So we've got out of kilter.
Okay, sorry to press you, but I'm just trying to get a direct answer to that question about whether there are too many, because people will talk about mechanisms like doubling the council tax, which obviously can generate more revenue for a local area. But is it about that, or is it about trying to put people off having a second home or a holiday home in the area? Do you want fewer second homes, holiday homes in North Devon than there are now?
I certainly want more affordable homes for residents, and we don't know, but I think we don't know how many. This is why we need the actual registration consultation. We don't know how many people are running Airbnb. Some people are running them in their spare room, which is actually a good income revenue stream for them as a family, whereas some are running whole homes. We don't actually know, and the councils that don't actually have accurate records, because some are business rates registered, some aren't, some are council tax, and so we need to actually work that out. But it does seem at this point in time that we have an imbalance, and we need to look at how do we encourage people to rent their properties out long term, not just short term, and there's some tax things that we could fix in there as well.
Labour's Jim McMahon.
I think when you've had for so long a system that is far too heavily weighted towards developers and investors, you are going to get people whose circumstances just can't match the demand in the marketplace, and that's what we're finding. I've got a 21-year-old son that we're facing exactly the same issues, where despite having a reasonable job that he's held for a number of years, is miles away from being able to get a mortgage on the income that he has, just because house prices have inflated so much where we live. And I think where the government can intervene is where there are artificial pressures that are distorting the housing market, and that's exactly what you have here in Cornwall. And frankly, we have a different artificial driver in Greater Manchester, where I live, which brings me back to my second point, really, which is you've got to have local control, because every area is so different. The circumstances are so different. The solutions will be so different. But for so long, central government, and the Tories have been in government for 12 years. I know Boris Johnson's like to recreate his premiership every 6 months or so, but 12 years is a long time for the type of inaction that we've seen. And the market has gone out of control in many places. Local authorities need to be given far more power and finance to get the right housing for the right communities. It's not just about the number of people on the waiting list, actually. It's whether people are in the right house for their circumstance. How many older people are in a house that they can barely get around because it's got stairs and they're not mobile in the way that they used to, but they're trapped in the house because there isn't a bungalow for them to go into or a flat for them to go into. How many young people actually don't need a 3-bedroom semi-detached house, but they do need a starter home, but the starter homes just don't exist? How many people have got an income to purchase some of the house, but not all of it, and need shared ownership?
How many houses a year would a Labour government build?
But we're a way out of our manifesto
So we don't
process yet. Well, we need to wait and see what the ground is like, and also actually, you know, more flexible and imaginative solutions to this. This is not about necessarily building 1 million new council houses and expecting that that will be the answer for every single community in the country, but it is about local power, local decision making, the finance where it's needed, and actually empowering local people in the community to take control of the places where you live.
Thank you.